12 years after a devastating betrayal that turned my life upside down, I found myself preparing for my wedding once again. I am now 38 years old and getting married to my wonderful girlfriend, who is 35, after 4 beautiful years together. This upcoming wedding is my second chance at love. The first time I almost got married was 12 years ago when I was engaged to my high school sweetheart, who at the time was also 38. We had been together for nearly a decade and lived together for 5 years. Everyone, including my family, was thrilled when I announced our engagement. It felt like we were ready to take that big step together. But fate had other plans. Just one day before our wedding, my world crumbled. My ex-girlfriend asked me to spend the night at a hotel before the big day, believing it would bring us good luck to be apart. Trusting her judgment, I complied. However, I made a fateful mistake when I forgot my shoes at home. A few hours after checking into the hotel, I returned to get them, expecting to grab my shoes and head back to my hotel room. Instead, I stumbled upon a scene that shattered my heart and life in an instant. I walked into my house, surprised by the darkness in the living room, since my ex was known for never turning off the lights. I headed straight to the bedroom, where I stored my shoes, only to find the worst sight imaginable. My ex-girlfriend was in bed with my younger brother, who was 34 at the time. They were so caught up in their actions that they barely noticed my entrance. It took a moment for them to recognize me, and in that moment, time froze. A flood of emotions rushed through me, shock, disbelief, and pure devastation. Realizing what I had just witnessed, I ran out of the house as my ex called after me. I drove back to the hotel in a state of panic, hyperventilating and struggling to process the betrayal. My mind raced with the fact that I was supposed to marry her the next day. The reality was too much to bear. Once I reached my hotel room, I took some time to gather myself, but soon enough, the weight of the situation hit me, and I found myself sobbing uncontrollably for over an hour. Thankfully, I hadn't informed my ex about which hotel I was in, so all she could do was text me. She bombarded my phone with apologies and excuses, claiming it was a one-time mistake and that she felt overwhelmed by the upcoming wedding. She said she didn't know who else to turn to and that my brother was just a comfort to her. I found it hard to believe her words after what I had seen. I blocked her number immediately, as well as my brother's, wanting nothing to do with their excuses and false apologies. With a heavy heart, I cancelled all the wedding arrangements. I knew that despite losing money in the process, it was worth it to escape the disaster that my life had become. My ex-girlfriend had wasted a decade of my life, and I refused to let her take any more from me. The first call I made was to my parents, explaining everything that had just happened. They didn't know how to respond, whether to comfort me or confront my brother. I gave them time to process it all, while I ordered dinner and cried myself to sleep. After that day, I only saw my ex twice. The first time was when she returned to pick up her things and leave my life for good. The second time was a couple of years later at a mutual friend's party. I spotted her making her way toward me and chose to leave immediately, not wanting to relive the hurt. Since then, my brother and I have not spoken. My parents decided to cut him off for his betrayal, and from what I know, he has been living in Europe for the past 3 years without returning home. Fast forward to now, I am on the brink of marrying the love of my life, but just when I thought I had left all that pain behind, I was shocked to receive a message from my ex-girlfriend a week before my wedding. This time, I felt only one thing, the urge for revenge. All of that is now in the past, and I have successfully moved on from that difficult chapter in my life. Currently, I find myself in a much better place than before, and I am lucky to be with a wonderful woman whom I trust completely. Everything was going smoothly until just a few days ago, precisely 1 week before my wedding. Out of the blue, my ex reached out to me. I am unsure how she discovered the news about me or my upcoming wedding, but she created a new Facebook account to contact me since I had previously blocked her original one. She sent me numerous messages expressing her devastation upon hearing that I was getting married again. It struck me as odd that she used the word again, because, although we had almost tied the knot, we were never truly married. The entire situation felt like a bizarre déjà vu. She was pleading with me to take her back, insisting that I was the only man she had ever truly loved. Her words managed to stir up emotions within me, even prompting me to immediately share the entire incident with my fiancé. A part of me was extremely annoyed and wanted to confront her for bothering me right before my wedding. Yet, there was another part of me that craved revenge. I had done the right thing years ago when I ended things with her, and I had handled the situation maturely. Nevertheless, the thought of making her feel the pain she caused me was tempting. I conveyed my feelings to my fiancé, and she was entirely supportive. She had been cheated on in the past, and while her experience hadn't spanned a decade, it still hurt her significantly. She understood my emotions and agreed that this time, instead of simply letting it go, we should devise a plan for revenge to ensure my ex faced the same heartache I did. This is why, only a couple of hours after receiving her messages, I decided to respond. I texted her that I was finally ready to talk. She was eager, telling me she could come to my place immediately. However, I instructed her to book a room at a nearby hotel, explaining that I would meet her there the following day to keep my fiancé from becoming suspicious. My fiancé was right beside me during this conversation, and she agreed to the plan without hesitation. The next day arrived, and I went to the hotel at the pre-arranged time. My ex appeared overjoyed to see me, and tears of happiness filled her eyes. Little did she know, those tears would soon turn into something much different. She sat me down and began to explain how sorry she was about everything that had happened over the past 12 years. She claimed she wanted to make amends but felt lost until she heard from a friend that I was getting married again. This news compelled her to reach out one last time, as she feared losing me forever. I listened attentively, pretending to be engaged and even holding her hands as she spoke. Meanwhile, I was anticipating my fiancé's arrival. About 20 minutes later, a knock echoed through the room. I rushed to open the door, and in walked my fiancé, accompanied by all of our groomsmen and bridesmaids, each wearing masks of my brother's face. They brought in a cake adorned with my brother's face smiling up at us. My ex was utterly horrified, and she seemed at a loss for words. We all shouted, "Surprise!" as she stood there, her expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. I could tell that no one could have predicted this moment. We had successfully convinced the hotel staff that we were throwing a surprise celebration for her, which was quite easy considering she had already told them to allow any guests to visit her. However, I had completely different intentions in mind. As she slowly began to process what was happening, she started sobbing and muttering incoherent phrases, clearly overwhelmed by the surprise. But I refused to let her off the hook that easily. After all, she had the audacity to message me just a week before my wedding, despite having cheated on me with my own brother the day before we were supposed to marry. Now, it was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. I made it clear to her that what was happening was a reflection of what she deserved, and I was determined she would understand the weight of her choices. If she genuinely believed that after cheating on me, she stood any chance of rekindling our relationship, she was gravely mistaken. She crossed a line that should never have been crossed, and for her to think it was acceptable to text me after everything she had put me through was simply unacceptable. I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that she was hurt by my actions because she had brought it all on herself. While delivering my thoughts to her, I was intentionally cold and curt, making it clear that I had no sympathy for her. Despite her sobbing and pleading for understanding, telling me that I should have just ignored her instead of humiliating her, I remained unyielding. I felt no remorse then, nor do I now. I firmly told her to never reach out to me again, leaving her alone and crying in that hotel room. In just 2 days, I am supposed to marry my fiancé. However, some of her friends believe I should apologize to my ex. They argue that regardless of my ex's actions, she did not deserve the harsh words I directed at her that day. My groomsmen, who have known me since middle school, do not share this sentiment. They understand the struggles I faced following my breakup, including battles with depression that stemmed from the pain she caused. They witnessed how deeply I loved her and how devastating her betrayal was, so they fully support my reaction to her. Meanwhile, my fiancé's friends seem to be expecting trivial high school drama, but the reality of the situation proved too heavy for them to grasp. My fiancé stands firmly by my side, supporting my decision not to apologize. However, her friends are making it clear that they will not participate in the wedding unless I offer an apology. This situation has left me feeling torn. On one hand, I want to ensure my fiancé enjoys our wedding day without any distress, given how much she values her friends. On the other hand, I firmly believe I owe my ex no apology whatsoever. She could have simply stayed out of my life, and this entire conflict could have been avoided. Instead, she seems intent on painting herself as the victim, sending me messages from various accounts to lament how I broke her heart and threaten that this will come back to haunt me. I have no interest in engaging with this manipulation, not for my ex and certainly not for my fiancé's friends. I know my ex will never ask me to apologize for her sake, but the pressure from my fiancé's friends weighs heavily on me. As the wedding day approaches, I'm left with the urgency to make a decision about what to do. The humiliation I experienced at the hands of my ex after her attempt to reconnect just a week before my wedding looms large in my mind. As for an update, opinions on my situation have been varied. With only 1 day left until the wedding, I decided to speak with my fiancé before making any decisions. I expressed my feelings to her, and she quickly reassured me that I absolutely did not need to apologize to my ex just because her bridesmaids believed I should. She emphasized that if my actions offended them, they were free to skip the wedding. My fiancé explained that her friends were unaware of the full story. They had no idea about the depth of my previous relationship with my ex or the betrayal I experienced when she cheated on me with my brother. These actions were deeply cruel and did not warrant forgiveness. Despite my fiancé's efforts to clarify the situation, her friends remained unconvinced and still thought I was being unreasonable. They insisted I owed my ex an apology. Frustrated by their lack of understanding, my fiancé chose to stop trying to explain my side. She informed them that if they felt that strongly, they could opt out of attending our wedding. It has been a day since she last spoke with her friends, and it appears unlikely that they will show up. One of them even returned the money for the bridesmaid dress she had purchased, indicating their intention to skip the festivities. Although my fiancé is putting on a brave front for my sake, I can tell that she is hurting. These women have been her friends since high school, and while she claims not to care about their absence, the reality is that this situation weighs heavily on her heart. My fiancé often claims that she doesn't care about certain things, yet I can sense that she actually does feel something deep inside. To address this, I've made the choice to reach out to her friends personally. I believe that by speaking to them, I might be able to persuade them to understand my point of view. As for my ex, she continues to be a significant source of frustration in my life. Just a few hours ago, she called me and proceeded to waste 15 minutes trying to argue with me over our past. She tried to convince me that I was still in love with her but too proud to admit it. Her reasoning was that my actions were just to humiliate her, so she assumed that I still had feelings for her, even if they were buried. While it's true that I do have feelings about her, those feelings are more akin to hate and disgust than love. She seems to think my desire to see her one last time was out of affection, especially since I held her hands during our conversation. In reality, my intention was to shock and provoke her. I even chuckled in her face while she went on about how we were soulmates and how I should call off the wedding. She insisted that I was making a terrible mistake. The only reason I engaged with her was to prevent her from doing something rash. I've been trying to communicate with her parents, hoping they would step in and take her away, but I haven't had any luck reaching them yet. I am waiting for their response so I can finally cut ties with her for good. It's important to note that, despite my hatred for her, I genuinely don't want her to harm herself. I have a sense of humanity, after all. Now, in an update, I can share that we are officially married. It has only been a few days since the ceremony, and I am still in disbelief that she is now my wife. I feel a great deal of joy, but there is also some unfortunate news. Her friends ended up not attending the wedding, despite my attempts to get them to come. I personally called each of them to explain my actions and to express why I felt no need to apologize. However, they seemed uninterested, even when I pleaded with them to attend for the sake of my wife. This attitude confused me. I would certainly go to a friend's wedding, even if I didn't like their partner. Yesterday, I finally learned the real reason for their absence. My wife confessed that she had suspected her friends would not show up, regardless of whether I apologized or not. This was due to her refusal to comply with their demands and the disagreements that arose. They felt a strong sense of unity among themselves and were not pleased that she chose to support me over them. These friendships dated back to high school, and throughout the years, they had maintained their bond without encountering significant conflict. This was the first real test of their friendship, and my wife had opted for our relationship instead. She admitted to feeling a bit upset but was too embarrassed to acknowledge it, considering how childish it seemed. For me, it was a relief to understand that this situation wasn't my fault. Her friends were simply self-centered. My wife even expressed relief that they didn't come to the wedding, as it meant she no longer had to strive for their approval. She could finally live her life by her own rules. This has turned out to be a positive outcome for us. Additionally, I received communication from my ex's parents right before my wedding. I hurriedly explained what their daughter had been trying to do, urging them to get to the hotel where she was staying and take her back for her safety. I described her behavior as psychotic and delusional, emphasizing that it wasn't safe for her to be alone. They had been away on a hiking trip without cell service, but now that they were back, they promised to come and take her with them for her own well-being. It has been a week since my wedding, and unfortunately, the time has been filled with nothing but drama. Earlier, I mentioned that I had not heard from my girlfriend or her parents since our last conversation. I assumed they had taken her home, but it turned out that was not the case. 2 nights ago, late in the evening, there was a knock at our door. My wife and I were puzzled because we were not expecting anyone. In a moment of poor judgment, I opened the door without checking the security cameras first. To my shock, my ex-girlfriend pushed past me and entered our home with her bags. My wife was sitting on the couch, and she jumped up as soon as she saw my ex walk in. I wanted to ask her what she was doing in our house, but before I could get the words out, my ex announced that she was there to stay. She explained that her parents had attempted to take her home a few days before, but she had refused to leave, convinced that I would take her back soon. My wife and I were both stunned and unsure how to respond to such an unexpected situation. My ex claimed that her parents had tried to force her to leave, resulting in a huge argument, and she ended up staying at a hotel. Now, she was low on money, which led her to believe moving in with me was the best option. She seemed to think that if I spent enough time with her, I would be reminded of our past together and would fall in love with her again. In that moment, I felt completely overwhelmed by the bizarre nature of the situation. My wife attempted to engage with my ex, but she ignored her and continued addressing me directly, demanding that I allow her to live with us. I gently told her that I was now married and that it was not acceptable for her to just show up and expect to stay. She dismissed my marriage, claiming that in her eyes, I was still unmarried. The reality of the situation hit me hard. I felt torn. Part of me wanted to kick her out, but another part recognized that she seemed genuinely unstable and needed help. I made the decision to sit her down in the living room while I spoke with my wife in our bedroom about what our next steps should be. Thankfully, my wife was understanding, recognizing that something was seriously off with my ex's behavior. It became clear to us that she needed professional help. I tried to reach out to her parents to inform them of what was happening, but they did not respond positively. They replied via text, saying they could no longer force her to return home and implied that she was too troubled to live with them. It was disappointing to see how quickly they had abandoned her, showing a lack of support when she needed them the most. Feeling that I had no other choice, I called my own parents. They arrived within half an hour. Meanwhile, my ex had fallen asleep on our couch, which turned out to be fortunate for us. When my parents arrived, we all agreed it was essential to take my ex to a therapist as soon as possible. We recognized the unpredictability of her behavior and knew we needed to act quickly. That night, both my wife and I decided to let her stay with us. We couldn't bring ourselves to feel anger towards her, the entire situation was so sad. It was evident that she was struggling with something serious, and it seemed like a part of her had broken. With the absence of her parents, who should have been there for her, we felt a sense of responsibility. The next day, my parents and I took her to the hospital. Even in her confused state, she continued to express how happy she was that I was finally coming around to her and even started making plans for our wedding. It was disheartening to see her in such denial. When we arrived at the mental health facility, she refused to see a mental health professional, insisting that she was perfectly fine. Eventually, after a lot of struggle and discussion with the doctors, they managed to calm her down by giving her some medication. The reality of her condition became evident as we continued to navigate this difficult situation, knowing that she needed the help and care only a professional could provide. After administering some medication to her, which I couldn't recall the names of, I noticed a significant change in her demeanor. She appeared much calmer, and after 1 or 2 hours had passed, she finally expressed a desire to go home. Relieved by this development, I helped her gather her belongings, placing them in the trunk of our car, and we set off together for her home. Throughout the ride, there was a heavy silence enveloping us. We were unsure of what to say. After all, what words could truly capture the complexity of the situation we were facing? Once we arrived at her home, she took the time to sincerely apologize to both my wife and me for all the trouble she had caused. She admitted to feeling ashamed of her actions and the events that had unfolded. My wife and I exchanged glances, feeling a deep sense of awkwardness in the atmosphere, but we reassured her that everything was all right. We encouraged her to prioritize taking care of herself, even as we prepared to drive back home. Feeling a mixture of concern and a desire to help, I decided to reach out to my ex's mother. I filled her in on everything that had transpired, hoping that this would underscore the seriousness of the situation. It seemed that this conversation finally brought to light the seriousness of the matter for them. My ex's mother informed me that she had moved in with her daughter and promised to keep us updated on her progress. Although there has been a lot of turmoil in recent events, my wife and I genuinely hope for her recovery and well-being above all else.